Hello, and welcome to One World, One Health, where we take a look at some of the biggest problems facing our world. I'm Maggie Fox. This podcast is brought to you by the One Health Trust with bite-sized insights into ways to help address challenges such as infectious diseases, climate change, and pollution. A One Health approach recognizes that everything on this planet, the animals, plants, and people, and the climate and environment are all linked. Infectious diseases are big killers, even in the 21st century. Viruses, fungal infections, and, most of all, bacteria kill millions of people every year. Science has developed drugs to fight them, but bacteria especially can evolve what's known as resistance, meaning the drugs no longer kill them. These antibiotic-resistant bacteria directly kill more than 900,000 people every year. And things are getting worse. When you include drug-resistant viruses and fungi, the formal name for these drug-defying powers is antimicrobial resistance, or AMR. It's a major topic of discussion this year for the World Health Organization, and it will take top billing at the UN high-level meeting. And to set the tone for all the discussion, the Lancet has published a series of 4 papers reviewing the problem and laying out some of the solutions. In this episode, we're chatting with Dr. Ursula Theuretzbacher, who founded the Center of Anti-Infective Agents in Vienna, Austria. She's helped write one of those Lancet papers suggesting what's needed to fight drug-resistant bacteria. Ursula, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
There's a long list of what the world needs to fight these drug-resistant bacteria, and right at the top of that list is new antibiotics. How are we doing on that?
Yeah, we have a really long list of things to do, and antibiotics are one of the things that are really necessary because resistance is a global problem, but it affects patients differently depending on where you live and your socioeconomic environment. So just an example, in low-income countries, the infection rate is much higher than anywhere else, and the first priority would be to reduce infection rate. In high-income countries with lower infection rate, new antibiotics are indeed a priority. In middle-income countries, both scenarios will apply, and new antibiotics in general are important to address this global resistance problem. If you ask how our pipeline look like, so what antibiotics we can expect in the future, and let's say now I'm talking about the near future, so maybe 1 to 8 years. When I'm looking at the clinical pipeline, then this is characterized by modified agents of old antibiotic classes. So these modifications aim at very specific resistance mechanisms. But these resistance mechanisms distributed differently in different countries. So these new antibiotics that are modified old antibiotic classes are effective in a very different way, again, depending on geography and healthcare systems and a lot of other different challenges. So they're a good solution for short term for addressing specific resistance issues, but they are not really a good response to the global resistance problem.
So what else do we need?
It's not simple. It's improving healthcare systems in low-resource countries. It's improving sanitation. It's improving access to clean water. It's improving access to old antibiotics. That's very important. So these are the basic measures that we need to take. And in high-income countries, we are, of course, in a much better position. So we have different problems.
Are there lots of new antibiotics in the works? Are companies jumping on the wagon here?
Yeah, companies are usually profit-oriented. And that's the norm. And they have internal competition with very highly profitable areas. For instance, cancer is a highly profitable field. And if they have to argue internally where to put their investment, then antibiotics always lose. And that's the reason why companies really lost their interest in this field. And in addition to this, it's also very difficult to find new good antibiotics. So having a great investment and return on investment that's not comparable to other fields is the main issue.
Should governments get involved?
Yes, I think that we really have to accept that there is no money in antibiotics. Like it is no money in other fields that have been very successful, like tuberculosis, new drugs in the tuberculosis field. There is no money to make, and still they are really successful with advocacy and getting funds and discovering new antibiotics. So I think we need many different activities, such as finding good collaborations, partnerships, private-public partnerships that provide a support for infrastructure that's needed, and also provide scientific support, knowledge support, because that's a main issue that we lost so much expertise. And so the public, the governments, could really help a lot in this. We need just a non-profit thinking in this field.
What do you mean by public-private partnerships?
That could be, for instance, a non-profit organization, whatever it is, working together with small companies or CROs, suppliers of services, working together and getting good results, and usually for much less money than if you're working with for-profit companies. That's just an example, supporting clinical trials, networks, supporting discovery campaigns, providing scientific expertise, and of course also providing funds. I think it's also a problem of funders that they are not always directing their funds to the most priority fields. And these fields are usually in high-income countries. So their funds are directed to countries that have less resistance problems than other countries in low-income settings where we would need these funds almost more urgently.
Ursula, what you're saying then is that the companies are looking to where there are the biggest profits, and they're helping the people who need help the least.
Yeah, companies are directing their efforts towards high-income countries. That means countries that can afford high prices, that have healthcare systems that can support their more expensive and more patient-centric and or pathogen-focused approaches. That's where the money can be achieved, the profit can be achieved. There is no profit in countries with the highest resistance burden. And that's why governments and also funders, philanthropic organizations, I think they should really improve their global reach and supporting also other activities other than drug discovery that are really necessary. It's such a multifaceted problem that we need a lot of global health knowledge and helping also funders to have a global view, because it's not that they don't want to do it. It's sometimes they just don't have the expertise, the global health perspective.
Isn't it hard to make this argument in a world where, after all, drugs are developed under a capitalistic system?
I think it's really difficult to get out of this capitalistic model, and it can only work if you have the basic thinking that there is no money to make. That means you have to switch completely to a non-profit system that's also usually much less costly than in the for-profit system. And it can be done. We have seen that for neglected diseases, tropical diseases, where these models have been shown to be quite successful. We just need to look to the TB, to the tuberculosis field. There are models that work mainly with collaborations, with partnerships, public-private partnerships, to a much lower cost. And I think that's possible and supported by a lot of government engagement. I think it could work.
So what else do we need, Ursula? How about quick and easy tests to determine what people are infected with in the first place? Isn't that one of the big problems? Doctors are treating based on symptoms and not based on what people actually have.
That's the very usual case, that we don't know which bacteria are causing this infection. So diagnostics are, of course, a very important tool, but it needs to be really fast. If you have to wait forever for a result, then it's less helpful. On the other side, even in great countries with the best diagnostic infrastructure, we know that these results are not always translated into therapeutic decisions. So having the diagnostic available doesn't mean necessarily better treatments. And there are also some situations, infections, where you don't get a result, even with good diagnostic tools, where you still need to treat empirically and hope to just use the best antibiotic in this case. So diagnostics are very important, but they are just one puzzle stone in the whole story.
Can vaccines play a role?
Vaccines are very important in prevention strategies. As I said before, reducing infection rates is absolutely important. And we have seen some really good vaccines with a great impact, such as the pneumococcal and Haemophilus vaccine. So rollout of this improving coverage is important. And then we have fields which would also have an indirect effect on antibiotic use, where we would need improved vaccines. So this would be tuberculosis again, malaria, and typhoid fever, where we have vaccines, but we need still much better vaccines. And then we have also the challenge of bringing these vaccines to the countries where it's needed and then to people who need them most. So scaling up, rollout, and all this is a very specific challenge.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Center of Anti-Infective Agents? What are you doing there and how did you come to establish it?
Yeah, I founded it in 1988 as independent scientific consulting institute with global collaborations in many different fields of antibiotic research and development and use. The previous years, I've focused mainly on big collaborations funded by governments or also in evaluating different scientific strategies for funders. And I've been working with WHO and different governments. So many diverse projects that are really interesting. And it gives a more global view of the field, not from one institution or one company, but really I've seen so many different approaches and strategies. And this is for me just very interesting.
You've been at this a long time. Why has the world taken so long to respond to this threat? And are you finally getting some energy behind it?
I'm not sure if I can be really optimistic because we have been talking for such a long time about this issue. But on the other hand, the world always takes long to respond to any threats. And at this time now, we have so many crises going on that it's really difficult to catch the attention of politicians who have to deal with climate crisis and biodiversity crisis and wars and all that. So I think we are always making little progress, step by step, but it will be a long way to solve somehow the most urgent problems of resistance.
It sounds like there is a lot to do, and I'm glad people have their eyes on it. Ursula, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Listeners, if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it. You can learn more about this podcast and other important topics at onehealthtrust.org. And let us know what else you'd like to hear about at OWOH@onehealthtrust.org. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to One World, One Health, brought to you by the One Health Trust. I'm Ramanan Lakshminarayan, founder and president of the One Health Trust. You can subscribe to One World, One Health on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at One Health Trust, one word, for updates on One World, One Health and the latest in research on One Health issues like drug resistance, disease spillovers, and the social determinants of health. Finally, please do consider donating to the One Health Trust to support this podcast and other initiatives and research that help us promote health and well-being worldwide. Until next time.